In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about password attacks. So similarly to just normal password attacks against systems, what you're usually doing is some form of brute force. And I'm going to do a quick search here for a user, and I'm going to find web pages that have come from my scans that have a user associated with them or a UID. And here's a good one. Here's a login form, and it looks like there's a user ID and a password that's associated with it. So I'm going to actually send that one to the intruder. And I'm going to go to the intruder. I'm going to take a look at my positions. So I've got a number of attack types that I can use, and I'm going to use a cluster bomb approach because that gives me the ability to manipulate the user ID and the password with two different types of payloads. So in the first payload set, I am going to put in usernames, and Burp Suite has a number of usernames that are built in. And the second payload set, I'm going to put in passwords. And I'm not going to do any options here. I'm actually just going to start my attack. Except that it requires me to plug this in, and so I'm going to do a simple list, and I'm going to go back and actually add the value back in. So I'm not actually playing with the value at all. I'm just going to use one payload to use what it was, and then I am going to go run my attack. And what this is doing is it's brute forcing. So what it's going to do is check all of the usernames with the first password, and then it's going to go check all of the usernames with the second password. And you can see there are like 30 million requests that we're going to be going through here just to do this brute force password attack. Now, one of the interesting things here is that the different payloads have these special characters in them, and usually you wouldn't have special characters because that may open the door to things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. So normally you would do some sort of input validation on any data that you get, and it's useful to do the input validation at the border between different layers in your application architecture. You wouldn't do the validation strictly at the browser, for example, because that's going to be done in JavaScript, and I can always run a proxy behind your JavaScript and undo any validation that you may have done there. So while validation is useful to do in JavaScript, and you can certainly do it in the browser, there are ways of getting around that. And you also can't guarantee that there may not be something happening at different layers, and so it's useful to do some level of input validation at the different layers between your application architecture. So that's always helpful to do. Now, this is going to take quite a while to run, and I'm not going to actually run it to completion. I'm going to pause the attack here, because the goal was simply to show you a different way of doing a password attack and just the ways that password attacks work. So it actually showed me some different things here with regards to the passwords. Another way of doing a password attack against a web application is in cases where there is a clear text submission of a password. So you can see here there was actually no encryption involved in this particular submission of this password. It was all done in the clear, and because of that, I could actually run a sniffer on the network and be able to capture the username and password. So that's another type of password attack that you can use. And it's not commonly one you could use against systems, but often web applications are done without SSL or TLS involved, and so there's no encryption. And sometimes I guess people believe that because we're primarily in switched architectures these days, that they're sort of invulnerable to grabbing passwords like that. The reality is they're just not. And so encryption, particularly since it's pretty easy to do, encryption is just really something that you should be doing anytime you're transmitting data between a client and a server. So input validation is a really good thing to protect against cross-site scripting and SQL injection and other types of attacks. And also you want to be doing encryption on your communication between your web server and your browser.